that citizenship anomalies are not the preserve of any particular community. Who, after all, talks of the grave injustices done to the Kandyan peasantry and the related dispossessions? Who talks of regional disparities and class-related anomalies? Who talks about the injustices done to Buddhists and the vandalism, dispossession and cultural genocide they've been at the receiving end of? Who talks about the bulls that were issued from the Vatican that justified and sanctioned the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of innocent Sinhala Buddhist citizens? The truth is that societies are not flat. They are made of hierarchies. There are institutional and processual factors that privilege some and marginalize or irrelevance large sections of the population. It is true also that many of these anomalies are ethnic free. On the other hand, the existence of one disjuncture does not justify the perpetuation of another. We are talking about reconciliation here, and it pertains principally to the issue of inter-ethnic harmony. I submit that there are three areas that require urgent attention and relevant resolution: citizenship rights, security, and a sense of belonging. Citizenship is a notion that derives primarily from constitutions and legal provisions. It also pertains to administrative sensitivity to particularities and mechanisms to address these. I contend that resource lack is a factor, but nevertheless insist that not all delays and non-implementation can be attributed to this. A more robust regime of implementation is required to resolve the day-to-day problems of the citizenry, which find exacerbated articulation among minorities in certain instances. Citizenship rights can resolve many anomalies, but subject to the qualification of adequate constitutional provision to insulate the citizen from the politician or the powerful. They therefore are predicated on there being adequate systemic checks and balances to correct institutional flaws in terms of transparency and accountability. They are not about special privileges for anyone, but about ensuring equality across the board. I submit that the 1978 Constitution is patently anti-citizen and that well-being is largely dependent on the benevolence of the powerful. Given power imbalances across society, the overall health of society is therefore a lottery. This needs to be corrected immediately so that institutional arrangements are sturdy enough to override whim and fancy of particular ruler. I submit that the 18th Amendment was a step back in terms of this objective, and that whatever resolution of minority grievances that ensues would be in the form of ruler largesse and not citizenship right. Security. It is natural that security is a serious concern for Tamil people, given the context in which these hearings are being held. Propaganda-led suspicion and the reality that the vast majority of personnel engaged in the LTT was Sinhalese overrides often the reality that the very same personnel rescued a population largely made of Tamils from the clutches of a terrorist and the agonies of a protracted war. The degree of threat required part suspension of normal legal provisions, and the law turned a blind eye to a lot of informal processes. I submit that while such departures are inevitable in times of war and create and feed a culture of lawlessness, post-war realities require a return to and a more stringent reiteration and enforcement of the law. This has to include a correction of flaws existing in the overall framework. The issue of security is not a concern peculiar to minorities. It is a concern for all citizens. In this regard, due acknowledgement is necessary of the fact that destabilizing forces exist and exist in vibrancy both here and abroad, and that they operate in concert and possess a well-oiled mechanism to paint fiction as realities, exaggerate anomalies, and move powerful players in the international community against the state and by extension the people of this country. While the end of war considerably alleviated the sense of insecurity among communities, especially Tamils in the northern and eastern provinces, who are unfortunately resident in the principal theatre of conflict, this fact is only consolation, and relative merits should not and cannot be allowed to be turned into perpetual excuses for system leak. I acknowledge that courtesy of rabid pro-LTT propaganda and meanness of spirit of certain key players in the international community, serious questions have been raised about the conduct of the military operations to eliminate the terrorist threat. Although these allegations even in aggregate, do not indicate systemic violation of accepted practice, although they are utterly insignificant when one compares the track record of countries that have been raising shrill objections and demanding investigations. I submit that they need to be addressed in order to ward off unnecessary and distracting pressure on the country as it strives to move forward in the aftermath of a long and bloody war, and also in order to ensure more stringent submission to the basic norms of humanity in the future. In this regard, I wish to make the following comments. One of the important and critical issues that the LLRC has to address, I believe, is the issue of accountability. That is, how proper investigations and inquiries into allegations of crimes committed by all parties during the last stages of the armed conflict are to be conducted. Two, I strongly believe that the armed forces of Sri Lanka did not pursue a policy of intentional and systemic harming of civilians. There is no evidence to prove that the armed forces carried out such a policy. And the massive and remarkable humanitarian mission of saving the lives of some 300,000 civilians from the clutches of the LTTE during the last stages of the conflict could not have been carried out so successfully had the government pursued a barbaric policy of killing or harming innocent civilians. 3. We need to understand that given the nature of the terrorist group that the armed forces had to confront, and given that group's tactics and modes of operation, there could have been instances when the armed forces would have been faced with enormous difficulty in distinguishing combatant and civilian. This is natural in any type of armed conflict, and in one especially between forces of a state and a terrorist group which contains combatants and suicide bombers dressed as civilians. In such a context, there could have been instances where innocent civilians were harmed, and where allegations and accusations have been leveled, and these allegations and accusations and concerns relate in particular to those raised before this commission by people especially in the north and eastern part of the country. Such allegations should be properly investigated. In addressing this issue of accountability, there are, I believe, two important issues that ought to be borne in mind. Firstly, that investigating alleged violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law does not diminish, but only enhances the image of Sri Lanka. Investigating allegations of crime and prosecuting those who may have committed those crimes is something that responsible states do. It is something that irresponsible states do not do. And there are plenty of examples of powerful states which have and are acting in such irresponsible ways in this world. The objection to outside investigation is a question pertaining to sovereignty, for it assumes that all allegations leveled against a state, including petty pilfering of the treasury, needs to be appraised by a neutral umpire. On the other hand, the absence of adequate and reliable independence in arbitration can and does give strength to the call for such interference. Secondly, Sri Lanka should not be a state which is unable or unwilling to carry out domestic investigations when and where necessary. The inability or unwillingness to investigate allegations through domestic investigative mechanisms gives rise to a consequence that Sri Lanka should do well to avoid, that of international investigation. I am referring here to the notion of complementarity, one frequently referred to in the discipline of international criminal law, and one which is referred to even in the statute of the International Criminal Court, example Article 17A of the statute. Therefore, a state should not be unwilling or unable genuinely to carry out the investigation and prosecution that is made necessary when allegations are leveled by people, especially in those areas where the armed conflict took place. Also, to carry out such investigations, the state should have proper, credible and independent institutions and mechanisms. I believe that the LLRC has the capacity to point out the flaws, the lacuna in the institutional structure and recommend corrections. Therefore, I believe it is the duty of this Commission to come out with a clear and concrete suggestion as to how investigations should take place. This is of utmost importance. The LLRC comprises of distinguished members who are qualified and experienced to make such recommendations and suggestions to the government. Now, reconciliation is a matter that can flounder on inadequacies in dealing with malintentioned entities as such level these allegations. One lesson that cannot be dismissed is that the LTTE's intransigence and power derived to a large extent from its success in one particular sphere of operation, propaganda. A comprehensive mechanism needs to be established to counter outrageous claims as being part and parcel of the overall national security requirement that is also pertaining to security. In addition, it should be recognized that one of the most effective means of rendering such moves ineffective is a happy and thriving Tamil community living in harmony with their brethren among the Sinhalese, Muslims and other communities. Development is only one part of the answer. It is necessary but not sufficient. Let me end by touching on the sense of belonging. This is a matter that constitutional amendment alone will not resolve. I believe that we have a long tradition of compassion, forgiveness and accommodation that makes intercommunal embrace possible. Regardless of histories, regardless of wrong done to one another, regardless of vandalism and desecration, the validity or otherwise of claim, the name, identity and political persuasions of wrongdoer, it is clear that this island belongs to all the citizens resident in it, and that progress in any sphere will be hampered if we cannot live together and respect one another. Wars are about the clash of arms among parties at odds with one another, and yet wars produce commonalities that are largely unrecognized. There is commonality in the suffering, the loss of life, dismemberment, displacement, orphaning, widowing, destruction, etc. There are also commonalities in hope and fear, sorrow at the loss of comrade, outrage at atrocity perpetrated. There is commonality in heroism too. Such things don't have an ethnic identity, they have a human quality, that of inadequacy as well as exceptionalism. Close to 100,000 people died over the last 30 years. If we take 1% of that as being skilled, good people who can be good and beneficial citizens, that's a huge loss of human resources. A similar loss took place in 1971 and 1988-89, and if those who complain about the huge human resource problem that we have today could look to those terrible times as the reason for what we lack. Regardless of who fought who, over what and with whom, there is a need to recognize that there was heroism among all groups involved in the conflict. There is a need to recognize that every person who died, every person who lost a limb or an eye or was in one way or another incapacitated, and every person who was dispossessed in one way or another was born on this land. That everyone had a mother and a father and perhaps a son, daughter, lover, spouse or friend. They are lamented as son, daughter, father, mother, brother, sister, wife, husband, lover or friend, more so than as champion of cause or defender of principle. In addition to all mechanisms and processes of reconciliation referred to above, I propose that a monument be designed, constructed and dedicated to what I would call the unnecessarily dead. It should contain the names of everyone who died an unnatural death directly consequent to the conflict, not just the combatants, but those who were at the wrong place at the wrong time, or was thought to have spoken out of turn or opposed when support was considered non-negotiable, and regardless of name, identity and political affiliation of assassin, manner, place and moment of death, side by side. They were all our fellow creatures, regardless of arguments over claims and counterclaims, right and wrong. I believe there are everyday acts of rebellion. There are also everyday acts of rupturing inter-ethnic amity. There are everyday acts that enhance our worth as human beings. These cannot be legislated. They are born, nurtured and find articulation based on the individual's particular understanding of the eternal verities. As a Buddhist, I can do no better than referring to the words of the Buddha, in particular to the Satara Brahma Viharana, or the four sublime modes of living: Metta, Mudita, Karuna and Upekkha, loving kindness, compassion, the ability to rejoice in the happiness of others and equanimity. Even as we employ wisdom and reason, the unguent that heals terrible wounds must contain the ingredients of compassion and humility, the ability to acknowledge error, the courage to correct, that is something every individual would do well, I believe, to take cognizance of. I thank you for your patience and express my gratitude for giving me this opportunity.